Story 1. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and I was browsing Craigslist looking for some used fitness equipment to build a little home gym. As a busy college student, I didn't have tons of money to drop on fancy new machines. My small apartment could only fit a few key items anyway. As I scrolled through the listings, one post caught my eye. A woman named Amanda from the town of Greenwood was selling a weight bench, Olympic barbell, and 300 O's of weight plates. The price was very reasonable at $250 for everything. I quickly shot her an email expressing interest and asking if it was still available. Within minutes, she replied saying yes, and that I could come pick the equipment up this evening after she got off work around 6 p.m. I happily agreed and plugged the address she provided into my phone for directions. Around 5:45 p.m., I hopped in my car and headed out to the neighborhood Amanda lived in. It was only about 15 minutes away in a nice suburb that I had been to a few times before. The streets were lined with mature trees and modest but well-kept homes. I located her address easily and pulled up the long driveway to park behind a dark blue minivan. Their house was a split-level ranch painted light grey with white trim. The front door was propped wide open, so I walked right up carrying the cash I had withdrawn earlier. As I stepped inside the door, I called out hesitantly, "Hello, Amanda." Just then, a tall middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair came around the corner. "You must be here about the weight set," he stated with a friendly smile. "Come on in. I'm Amanda's husband, Mark. She just texted that she's running about 10 minutes late from work, but should be here soon." Mark led me into the garage where the weight equipment was neatly arranged. It looked barely used, and I was delighted with the bargain I had found. Mark and I chatted casually about working out while waiting for Amanda. After about 15 minutes, I was starting to feel a little uneasy that she still hadn't arrived. I also noticed that Mark kept shifting topics every time I asked about Amanda or their family. The garage was sparsely furnished and didn't seem like an active space. I eventually pointed out that it was getting late, and I should probably get going soon if Amanda wasn't going to make it home. But Mark suddenly moved between me and the doorway leading back inside. "You know what? Why don't you just try it out real quick first?" he suggested with an odd glint in his eyes. "I'm sure Amanda won't mind." My pulse spiked with alarm, and I knew I needed to get out of there. Casually sliding my hand into my pocket, I fumbled to dial 911 on my phone. "No, that's Oak. I don't need to try it out," I muttered, moving slowly away from him. When I felt like I had a clear path to dash through the side door that led outside, I suddenly screamed, "Amanda DOESNT LIVE," and sprinted for freedom. Mark roared and lunged after me, but got tangled up trying to get through the narrow doorway. I raced around the side of the house and jumped in my car, peeling out down the street just as Mark came barreling out of the garage towards me. My hands shook as I followed the dispatcher's instructions and waited near the neighborhood entrance for the police to arrive. It turned out the house belonged to a couple who were out of town, and Mark had broken in using a Craigslist scam to lure victims. I was thankful I escaped before finding out his true twisted intentions. After giving my statement, the officers said Mark sadly got away, but they would circulate his description to be on alert. I still shudder thinking what could have happened if Amanda hadn't run late. Now I only buy things in public places and bring friends just to be safe. Story 2. After 4 long years, I had finally graduated college and was ready to start the next chapter of my life. But first, I needed to find a place to live. I was working part-time at a cafe while searching for a full-time job, so my budget was pretty tight. Most apartments were way out of my price range, even with roommates. My college buddy Jake suggested I check Craigslist for people renting out rooms in their houses. "That's going to be your cheapest option," he advised. Having no other leads, I took his suggestion and began the hunt. Scrolling through the listings, I found one that looked promising. A room for rent in a 4-bedroom house on Elm Street, posted by a guy named Tom. The photos showed a nice suburban home with a cozy private room upstairs, and the price of $500 per month including utilities was doable. I emailed Tom expressing my interest, and he responded right away, telling me to swing by that same day to check out the place. After my cafe shift ended, I plugged the address into my GPS and headed over. The house was in a quiet neighborhood and looked just as nice in person as it did in the photos. I walked up and knocked on the bright red front door. A few moments later, it slowly creaked open. A tall, bulky man with messy hair and tattered clothes stood in the doorway. He introduced himself as Tom and welcomed me inside. I immediately noticed a strong, unpleasant odor coming from him, like he hadn't bathed in weeks. Trying not to breathe too deeply, I followed him down the hall. He showed me the kitchen first, which was a disaster zone. Dirty dishes piled high in the sink, trash overflowing, and grimy floors. Definitely not what the clean, tidy pictures had portrayed. The living room was in a similar state, with stained furniture and clutter everywhere. I grew uneasy, but tried to keep an open mind. As we headed upstairs, Tom suddenly stopped at the bottom step. He smiled creepily and gestured for me to go up first. I hesitantly complied, a knot forming in my stomach. Reaching the top, I saw a long hallway with 4 closed doors. Tom called up that my room was the first on the left. Approaching the door, I heard a loud thump come from inside, like someone knocking something over. "Are there someone in there?" I asked nervously. "Oh, don't worry, that's just my friend staying over," Tom replied casually. My pulse spiked. None of this was adding up and alarm bells were ringing loudly in my head. I wanted nothing more than to flee this bizarre house and questionable host. Making up an excuse about needing to think on it more, I hastily retreated down the stairs. Tom's demeanor shifted instantly, his eyes cold and menacing. He blocked my path to the front door and insisted I at least look at the room before deciding. I stood my ground and firmly stated I was no longer interested. For a moment, I thought he might refuse to let me leave. But to my relief, he finally sighed and stepped aside. I bolted out the door without looking back, my heart pounding against my ribs. Once safely back in my car, I immediately blocked Tom's number. The next day, I checked Craigslist again, and the listing was gone. I don't know what Tom was hiding, if anything illegal or dangerous, but I was thankful I went with my gut instinct to get out of there fast. Jake helped me find a real room for rent with normal roommates soon after. But I'll never forget that unsettling experience at Tom's House of Horrors. Story 3. It was my junior year of college, and I was sharing a small rental house with my best buddy James. We had decided to move off campus to save some money compared to crazy dorm costs. The house itself was pretty basic: 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a tiny kitchen, and a cramped living area. It wasn't anything fancy, but it worked for us. The neighborhood was quiet and mostly families and older couples. For the first few months, James and I got along fine. We split all the bills and took turns doing chores. But after a while, the expenses started to add up. Our part-time jobs just weren't cutting it anymore. One night over pizza and video games, James suggested we find a 3rd roommate to lower the costs. Neither of us wanted to leave the place, so it seemed like the obvious solution. We asked around, but none of our college friends were able to move in. Taking matters into our own hands, James made a post on Craigslist looking for a roommate, while I posted on Facebook. After a couple weeks with no luck, James got an email from a guy named Alex responding to his ad. Alex was a recent college grad working an office job downtown. He came by to see the place, and we hit it off right away. He was friendly, clean-cut, and respectful, basically the ideal roommate. We were thrilled when he agreed to move in. The first few months living with Alex were great. We'd often hang out together after work, having beers and playing video games, but then Alex started acting distant. He stopped engaging with us and spent all his time shut in his room. James and I just figured he was going through something, so we gave him space. But after a while, things started getting weird. One day, I noticed a horrible stench coming from Alex's room when I walked by. It was like rotting garbage, but 10 times worse. Concerned, James and I knocked on Alex's door to ask him about it. No answer. We could hear him in there, but he ignored us. Very strange. The next day, I confronted Alex before he left for work. He mumbled something about taking trash out and brushed me off. James and I exchanged puzzled looks. His explanation made zero sense. The smell disappeared shortly after, so we dropped it. For the next couple weeks, Alex barely spoke to us. Then one night, I awoke at 3 a.m. to the sound of Alex stomping around downstairs. Half asleep, I assumed he was just getting water until I remembered. Alex's room was on the main floor. The noises were coming from our basement. In the morning, Alex was gone. For the next few days, he didn't come home at all. No calls or texts either. Now, we were really freaked out. Had he been sneaking into our basement doing God knows what? Working up the courage, James and I went into Alex's room looking for clues. A lot of things were missing. In his closet, I found a pair of women's glasses. Very weird since Alex didn't wear glasses. At that point, we contacted the police to report Alex missing. When the cops arrived, we showed them Alex's photo to identify him. Or so we thought. Turns out, the man in the photo was actually a missing person named Tyler. In a shocking turn of events, we learned that Alex had been lying about his identity all along. He was just some random guy who had been living with us under a fake name. The police opened a missing persons case, but the trail went cold quick. James and I never saw or heard from Alex again. Where he went and why he pretended to be someone else remains a mystery. That house gave me the creeps after that, so as soon as our lease was up, James and I found a new place. I'm just glad we got out of there before anything worse happened.